He was a billionaire whose name appeared regularly in major financial reports, a man known not only for his fortune but for his integrity, his sharp mind, and his unwillingness to tolerate injustice. Victor quickly smoothed his expression and approached with a rehearsed professionalism that now felt painfully thin. He welcomed Ethan to the boutique, his voice slightly higher than usual, masking the sudden anxiety clawing at his chest. Lauren stood frozen behind the counter, clutching a folder to her chest, her earlier smugness evaporating into thin air. Ethan didn't bother with pleasantries. His voice was low but carried a sharp edge as he asked for an explanation regarding the treatment his wife had just endured in their store. The weight of the question hung heavy in the perfumed air. Victor stammered, offering vague excuses about company policies and misunderstandings, desperately trying to frame the situation as a simple error in judgment. But Ethan's piercing gaze never wavered. He listened quietly, each second of silence more damning than the last. Then he calmly but firmly cut Victor off, stating that discrimination cloaked in policy was still discrimination. Every word hit like a hammer, deliberate and undeniable. Around them, the boutique had grown painfully silent. Customers pretended to browse but strained their ears to catch every word. Employees shifted uncomfortably, sensing the inevitable storm building in the room. Victor glanced around for support, but none came. Even Lauren had taken a step back, her face pale and rigid. Ethan didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His calm fury was louder than any shouting could have been. In that moment, standing in the center of the luxurious boutique, he became a mirror reflecting every ounce of ugliness that had just unfolded under the store's pristine facade. He made it clear that there would be consequences. Serious consequences. No one, not Victor, not Lauren, not anyone on that staff would walk away pretending they hadn't just exposed the worst parts of themselves. Olivia stepped inside quietly then, standing just a few feet behind Ethan, her presence steady and dignified. She didn't need to say anything either. Her very existence in that space, her refusal to shrink or hide, spoke volumes. Ethan, sensing her strength behind him, felt even more resolute. He calmly informed Victor that the situation was far more serious than he seemed to realize. Because, as of recently, Ethan's investment company had finalized the acquisition of the parent corporation that owned Elegance Boutique. In other words, Ethan Bennett wasn't just another customer today. He was their new boss. Victor's face drained of color, his mouth opening slightly in shock. Lauren's hand flew to her mouth as she gasped audibly. The entire boutique seemed to freeze in a moment of collective disbelief. Ethan didn't gloat. He didn't need to. The truth was enough. The silence stretched between them, thick with realization, before Ethan spoke again. He told Victor plainly that today would not be forgotten, and neither would the values that had been so shamefully abandoned. Today would be remembered as the day a simple act of cruelty met a reckoning it could not outrun. The tension inside Elegance Boutique had reached a suffocating level. No one moved. No one dared to breathe too loudly. Every pair of eyes, from the stunned customers to the wide-eyed employees, was locked onto Ethan Bennett. His presence filled the room in a way that was impossible to ignore, and the quiet strength in his voice made it clear that he was not here to argue or negotiate. He was here to deliver the truth. Slowly, deliberately, Ethan stepped closer to the center of the store, his gaze never leaving Victor Coleman. There was no anger on his face, only the sharp, unwavering look of a man who knew exactly what power he held and was about to wield it. Victor swallowed hard, trying to maintain his composure, but his stiff posture and shifting eyes betrayed the growing panic building inside him. Ethan waited until the silence was so thick it seemed to press against everyone's skin before he spoke again. In a calm, measured voice, he explained that his investment firm had recently finalized the acquisition of the luxury conglomerate that owned Elegance Boutique along with several other high-end brands. As of that morning, he was not just a customer. He was the majority owner. The words fell into the room like a heavy stone dropped into still water. Shock rippled through the crowd. Customers exchanged stunned glances. Employees looked at each other in disbelief, some taking small, instinctive steps backward as if trying to escape the weight of what they were hearing. Victor's face turned a sickly shade of gray, and for a brief second, he looked like he might actually collapse where he stood. Lauren Miller, who had been so confident and dismissive earlier, clutched the counter for support, her hands trembling slightly. The entire image they had worked so hard to project, exclusivity, sophistication, superiority, cracked in an instant, revealing the ugly truth underneath. Ethan continued speaking with the same even tone, laying bare the reality they now had to face. He said he hadn't come looking for trouble that day. Olivia had simply wanted to buy a meaningful gift, to share something special with the man she loved. Instead, they had been met with judgment, arrogance, and discrimination, all because of the shallow standards that still infected places like this. He told them plainly that under his ownership, such behavior would not be tolerated. Not now. Not ever. Respect, dignity, and equality were not optional values. They were non-negotiable. Olivia stood quietly at Ethan's side, her presence a silent testament to everything he was fighting for. She didn't need to speak because her very being, her resilience, her refusal to shrink, said more than words ever could. Watching her, Ethan felt his determination harden even further. This wasn't just about making an example out of Victor and Lauren. This was about setting a standard that would echo far beyond the walls of this store. Victor attempted to stammer an apology, his words fumbling over each other in a desperate attempt to salvage his position, but Ethan held up a hand to stop him. Apologies were meaningless without action. Regret was hollow if it only surfaced when consequences arrived. What mattered now was whether they were willing to change, whether they could understand that human worth was not measured by clothing brands or the color of someone's skin. Ethan gave Victor a hard look, one that seemed to strip away every excuse and defense he had tried to build. He reminded him that leadership was not about maintaining power through exclusion, but about building trust through fairness. He said that from this day forward, Elegance Boutique would be run by a new code, one rooted in respect, inclusion, and true sophistication, the kind that came from treating every person with decency. Around them, the store remained silent, the message settling heavily into every heart and mind present. Ethan wasn't just demanding change. He was embodying it. And in doing so, he showed everyone there that real power wasn't about wealth or image. It was about character. As Ethan finished speaking, he turned toward Olivia, offering her a small, knowing nod. She smiled gently, the pain of the past hour giving way to something stronger, something brighter. Justice, dignity, and hope had walked through those glass doors with Ethan Bennett, and now they were here to stay. After Ethan Bennett laid down the truth of who now owned Elegance Boutique, the room stayed frozen in a stunned kind of silence. Victor Coleman's face was pale, his lips slightly parted, as if struggling to find a way to undo what had just been exposed. Around him, employees shifted uncomfortably, sneaking worried glances toward the man who, only minutes ago, had strutted through the store with unshakable confidence. Ethan gave them all a moment to sit with the weight of the revelation. He wasn't here for drama. He wasn't here to make a scene. He was here to make sure accountability wasn't just a word people threw around when it was convenient. It had to mean something. Slowly and deliberately, Ethan turned his attention back to Victor, his voice steady and low. He made it clear that there would be no quiet sweeping under the rug today. No whispered apologies behind closed doors. The people who had disrespected his wife had done so publicly, and now they would answer for it publicly. Victor shifted on his feet, his throat working as he tried to summon the polished corporate mask he usually wore so easily, but it was no use. Ethan saw right through him. Everyone did. Ethan calmly told Victor he expected a full, public apology to Olivia, right there in front of all the employees and customers. He said that an apology wasn't a favor being granted. It was the bare minimum of human decency owed to someone who had been humiliated for no other reason than not fitting into their shallow expectations. Victor hesitated, his pride fighting hard against the humiliation. But he also knew he had no choice. The old rules no longer applied. Ethan was not a man he could intimidate, nor was Olivia someone he could dismiss and forget. Lauren Miller, standing a few steps behind Victor, looked equally trapped. Gone was the smugness she had carried earlier when she thought she could size Olivia up with one glance. Now, she looked small, exposed, and deeply uncomfortable. Olivia stood quietly by Ethan's side, watching without anger, without hatred, but with a calm strength that filled the room far more powerfully than any shouting ever could. She didn't need to demand an apology. Her very presence made it necessary. After a long, heavy pause, Victor finally stepped forward. His shoulders slumped, his head slightly bowed, and his voice unsteady. He offered a public apology, stumbling over his words, struggling to find the right ones that could erase what had been said and done. But it was too late for erasure. Words once spoken couldn't be taken back. Actions once done couldn't be undone. All he could do now was own the damage and hope to repair even a fraction of what he had broken. Ethan listened carefully, his face unreadable, until Victor finished. Then Ethan spoke again, his voice firm but fair. He told Victor that apologies were important, but they were only the beginning. Real accountability required change. Real growth required discomfort. And if Victor or anyone else in that boutique believed they could continue in their roles without confronting the deep biases that led to this day, they were wrong. Ethan presented Victor with a choice. He could either resign immediately and step away from Elegance Boutique entirely, or he could agree to undergo an intensive training program on racial bias, customer equality, and respectful service. The twist, Ethan explained calmly, was that Olivia herself would be overseeing the training, ensuring that it wasn't just another box to check but a true opportunity to understand the damage that shallow prejudice could cause. Victor's face went even paler, and a ripple of quiet murmuring swept through the room. The idea of being taught and corrected by the very woman he had disrespected clearly stung his pride. But Ethan made it clear there was no negotiation. Growth sometimes came dressed as humiliation, and for Victor, it was long overdue. After a tense moment, Victor finally nodded, accepting the conditions. His voice, when he spoke, was soft and broken, stripped of the arrogance he had once worn like a badge. Ethan didn't gloat. He simply nodded in acknowledgement and turned back toward Olivia. She met his gaze, her heart full of gratitude, not because she had been vindicated, but because together they had demanded something more than justice. They had demanded change. And standing there in the quiet aftermath, it felt like a new beginning was finally possible. The weight of the moment settled over Elegance Boutique like a heavy curtain. After Victor Coleman agreed to undergo the training that Ethan Bennett had laid out, the room stayed tense and still. No one quite knew what to say. Employees stood frozen behind their gleaming counters, customers whispered in hushed tones, and the heavy scent of expensive perfumes mixed with the uncomfortable air of reckoning. Ethan didn't rush. He gave everyone time to absorb what had just happened. Accountability wasn't just about a few stern words and an apology. It was about making sure lessons were learned the hard way when necessary. Victor's choice to stay and face the consequences under Olivia's guidance wasn't meant to humiliate him for spectacle. It was meant to force him to truly look at himself, to confront the ugly biases he had let fester unchecked for too long. Ethan stepped forward slightly, making it clear that this wasn't the end of it. He calmly explained that the anti-bias and human dignity training would not be a one-day seminar tucked between coffee breaks. It would be a rigorous, hands-on program designed to change behavior from the inside out. And it wouldn't stop with Victor. Every employee in the store, from managers to new hires, would be required to participate. If anyone refused, they would be let go without hesitation. Ethan's words, delivered without raising his voice, carried a finality that left no room for argument. He wasn't asking for change. He was enforcing it. Lauren Miller shifted uncomfortably, understanding that her earlier behavior would not be forgotten either. Ethan turned to her briefly, locking eyes in a way that sent a clear, unmistakable message. There was no special treatment. Everyone would be held accountable for their actions, no matter how small or hidden behind polite smiles they once were. Olivia remained composed through it all. She didn't gloat, didn't allow herself even a small moment of triumph. That wasn't who she was. She had not come to Rodeo Drive looking for a fight. She had come looking for a meaningful gift, and through an unexpected turn of events, she had ended up giving something even more important to the world around her, a wake-up call. Ethan continued by informing Victor that, in addition to the training, he would personally oversee a new inclusion policy for Elegance Boutique moving forward. That policy would be built from the ground up with Olivia's input, ensuring it wasn't just words in a manual but a living, breathing part of the store's daily operations. Victor nodded stiffly, his pride visibly bruised but his understanding deepened. He knew this wasn't just about saving his job anymore. It was about saving his integrity, if there was still a chance to rebuild it. Ethan paused for a moment, surveying the room, then made one final point. He said that businesses, no matter how luxurious, existed because people trusted them with their time, their attention, and sometimes even their dreams. Treating someone as less simply because they didn't fit a certain mold wasn't just bad for business. It was wrong. Period. No luxury was worth losing humanity over. With those final words, Ethan turned back toward Olivia, giving her a look full of quiet pride and admiration. She had endured so much in such a short time, yet here she stood, stronger and more graceful than anyone else in that glittering boutique. Without fanfare, Ethan offered Olivia his arm. She took it without hesitation, and together, they walked out of Elegance Boutique, leaving behind a silence heavy with lessons that would not be easily forgotten. As they stepped into the sunlight, a small crowd that had gathered outside broke into soft, spontaneous applause. Word of what had happened inside had already begun to spread, and people who once might have looked past the quiet woman in sneakers now looked at her with something different in their eyes. Respect. Understanding. Hope. Olivia smiled quietly, feeling the warmth of Ethan's hand steady at her back. They hadn't just confronted injustice that afternoon. They had planted the seeds of real change. And even if the road ahead remained long and challenging, she knew in her heart they had already made a difference that would ripple out far beyond the golden sidewalks of Rodeo Drive. The sun was starting to dip lower over the city, casting long, soft shadows across Rodeo Drive as Olivia and Ethan Bennett stepped away from Elegance Boutique. The tension and weight of the confrontation behind them began to lift little by little with each step they took. Though their faces were calm, there was a quiet current of emotion running between them, an understanding that today had been about much more than a watch, much more than a humiliating moment inside a store. It had been about dignity, about standing up when it would have been easier to walk away, and about forcing the world to take a closer look at the silent lines it still drew between people. As they moved down the street, people glanced at them, some offering small smiles of respect, others giving them a nod of acknowledgement. Word had traveled fast. Videos were already being shared online. Photos had been taken. Witnesses were telling their own versions of the story. But no version could fully capture what it meant to stand in your truth without letting bitterness consume you. Olivia knew she could have responded with anger. She could have shouted or cursed or demanded immediate revenge. But that was never who she was. She believed true strength was quieter than rage, more powerful than spite. True strength was the ability to remain kind and whole even when others tried to strip that away. As they reached a small coffee shop tucked into a quieter corner of the street, Ethan guided Olivia inside. It was their favorite kind of place, simple, warm, real. They found a small table by the window and ordered 2 cups of coffee, sitting in comfortable silence for a while, just letting the noise of the city settle outside the glass. Olivia wrapped her hands around her cup, feeling the warmth seep into her fingers. She looked at Ethan and gave him a small, grateful smile. He smiled back, the kind of smile that said everything without needing words. They didn't need to rehash what had happened. They both understood it deeply. They both knew that justice wasn't always about dramatic victories or public applause. Sometimes it was about the quiet moments afterward, knowing you had done the right thing when it would have been easier to do nothing. Meanwhile, the world outside kept moving. The story of what happened at Elegance Boutique began to catch fire online. News outlets picked it up. Headlines appeared, calling out the racism and prejudice Olivia had faced, and praising Ethan's calm but firm defense of her dignity. More importantly, people who had never met Olivia felt seen through her story. Messages poured in from around the country. People sharing their own experiences of being judged, being dismissed, being made to feel small because of things they could not and should not have had to change. Olivia's quiet strength gave those stories a voice. It gave people permission to believe that even small acts of standing up could ripple out and make a real difference. Inside the coffee shop, Olivia and Ethan didn't talk much about the media attention. That had never been the goal. Instead, they talked about what could come next. About how to use this moment to build something lasting. Maybe it would be supporting better training programs across more businesses. Maybe it would be speaking up in places that still needed to be challenged. Maybe it would simply be living their lives as examples of what respect and love should look like. Whatever it was, they both knew they were ready. As the sun dipped lower and the city lights flickered on, Olivia leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the peace that comes only after a battle fought with honor. She wasn't just proud of how Ethan had stood up for her. She was proud of herself for standing tall, for not shrinking, for choosing to hold on to her humanity even when others tried to deny it. She knew there would still be days when the world disappointed her. There would still be moments when old prejudices tried to rear their ugly heads. But she also knew that every time someone stood up instead of staying silent, the world changed just a little bit more. Justice was not a single moment. It was a journey, and hope was its constant companion. As Olivia and Ethan finished their coffee and stepped back into the evening air, hand in hand, they carried with them something far more valuable than any watch or luxury item could offer. They carried proof that dignity could not be stolen, that kindness was not weakness, and that real change, no matter how slow, always started with one brave step forward. True strength is not shown through wealth, appearance, or loud declarations. It is found in the quiet dignity with which we handle adversity. Olivia Bennett's story reminds us that no matter how the world may judge us based on superficial things, our true worth is unshakable when rooted in character, integrity, and self-respect. We cannot control how others perceive us, but we can always control how we respond, with grace, courage, and unwavering pride in who we are. This lesson is especially important for those who have lived long enough to know that life's challenges often reveal a person's deepest truths. Age teaches us that dignity must never be traded for acceptance, and that standing firm in moments of injustice not only honors ourselves but inspires others to find their voice too. It reminds us that kindness, respect, and fairness must be the cornerstones of every interaction, whether we are giving it or demanding it. In a world that sometimes feels quick to judge and slow to listen, choosing compassion and standing up for human dignity is an act of quiet revolution. If Olivia's journey touched you or reminded you of an experience in your own life, we invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. What other real-life lessons or inspiring stories would you like us to explore next? Make sure to like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss more meaningful and powerful stories like this one. Your voice matters, and together, we can keep spreading hope and dignity where they are needed most. What if a simple act of kindness could expose the ugly truth hidden behind luxury and power? Imagine being judged, humiliated, and then standing tall to change everything. This is a story that will leave you questioning how we treat one another. Stay with us until the end, like this video, and subscribe right now because what you are about to witness will change the way you see dignity forever. Olivia Bennett had never cared much for extravagant displays of wealth. Despite being married to Ethan Bennett, one of California's most influential billionaires, she still chose to live her life simply and gracefully. She didn't believe that designer labels or sparkling diamonds defined a person's worth. To Olivia, true beauty was found in sincerity, kindness, and the quiet strength to remain grounded even when the world around you was obsessed with appearances. That's exactly why, as Ethan's birthday approached, Olivia wanted to find a gift that spoke not to his success but to his soul. She spent days thinking about it, wanting something meaningful that reflected their journey together, not just another luxury item to add to his already vast collection. After careful thought, Olivia decided on a rare vintage watch she had seen once in a magazine. It was a 1960s timepiece, a piece of history, carefully preserved through generations. Only 5 of them existed in the world. Ethan, a lover of historical artifacts and timeless craftsmanship, would appreciate it far more than any new, flashy gadget. It wasn't just a watch, it was a story captured in metal and glass, something that could quietly whisper memories of their years together every time he wore it. On a bright afternoon, Olivia set out on her mission. She didn't dress up or try to blend into the glitzy scene of Rodeo Drive. Instead, she wore what made her feel comfortable: a simple white t-shirt, soft gray joggers, and her favorite pair of worn-in sneakers. She tied her curls into a neat bun, applied a bit of lip balm, and stepped into the bustling streets with a sense of quiet determination. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was simply a woman with a mission of love in her heart. As she walked past rows of luxury boutiques, Olivia noticed the curious glances people often cast her way. She knew what they were thinking. She didn't look like the typical Rodeo Drive shopper, and she was perfectly fine with that. It wasn't the first time she had felt the invisible wall society placed between people based on clothes, color, or the way they carried themselves. But Olivia carried something they could not see, a heart full of love, resilience, and quiet confidence. When she finally stopped in front of Elegance Boutique, her heart skipped a beat. Behind the gleaming glass window sat the vintage watch, resting atop a black velvet display. It looked even more beautiful than she had remembered. Bathed in soft lighting, its delicate hands seemed to tick in slow, reverent tribute to the past. Olivia stood for a moment on the sidewalk, smiling softly to herself. This was it. This was the perfect gift. She imagined Ethan's face lighting up, that rare, boyish smile he saved for moments that truly touched his heart. Taking a deep breath, Olivia straightened her shoulders and prepared to walk inside. She felt a small flutter of nerves, not because she doubted her choice, but because deep down, she knew that walking into such a high-end place dressed simply would invite judgment. Still, Olivia believed in herself. She believed in the purpose of her journey. What mattered most wasn't how others saw her, but the love and thought behind what she was about to do. With that, she pushed open the heavy glass doors of Elegance Boutique, stepping into the cool, perfumed air. She had no idea that this simple act, driven by love and sincerity, was about to set off a chain of events that would not only test her dignity but also send a powerful message far beyond the walls of the glittering store. The moment Olivia Bennet stepped into Elegance Boutique, it was as if an invisible ripple swept through the room. Conversations faltered mid-sentence, soft laughter stopped, and curious glances quickly turned into silent judgment. Olivia immediately felt it, the slight change in the air, the way people's eyes lingered on her simple outfit, the way their smiles turned stiff and tight. But she kept her head high and her steps steady. She had not come to seek approval or admiration. She had come for something meaningful, and no amount of silent criticism was going to make her forget that. As Olivia made her way toward the elegant glass case where the vintage watch was displayed, she caught the attention of Lauren Miller, a young sales associate with perfectly styled blonde hair and an expression carved from cool marble. Lauren watched Olivia from behind the counter, her arms crossed, her eyes sharp and calculating. To Lauren, appearances were everything. Growing up among luxury and privilege, she had been trained to assess customers at a glance. And everything about Olivia, from her casual sneakers to the gentle, unbothered way she carried herself, screamed to Lauren that this was not the kind of client they catered to. Lauren hesitated for a moment, debating whether it was even worth approaching, but professionalism demanded at least a pretense of service. She stepped forward, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floor, her smile polite but tight. Olivia, standing in front of the glass case, smiled warmly and asked to see the vintage watch. There was a small flicker in Lauren's eyes, a brief moment where suspicion crossed her features. That watch was one of the most expensive items in the boutique, priced at $85,000. It was a piece reserved for serious collectors and wealthy elites. Lauren's posture stiffened. She politely, but with an unmistakable hint of sarcasm, informed Olivia of the price, as if to discourage her. Olivia, unfazed, simply nodded and repeated her request to see the watch. Reluctantly, Lauren retrieved the key and opened the case, moving with exaggerated caution, as if the mere proximity of Olivia might somehow tarnish the precious item. As she placed the watch on the counter, Olivia leaned in to examine it, her face lighting up with genuine appreciation. She admired the craftsmanship, the history woven into its tiny gears, the quiet elegance it carried. She knew without a doubt that Ethan would love it. With calm confidence, Olivia said she would like to purchase the watch. That was when the real tension began. Lauren's lips pressed into a thin line. She hesitated, then suggested, in a voice dripping with patronizing concern, that perhaps Olivia might prefer something more affordable. It wasn't a suggestion meant to help. It was a thinly veiled insult meant to remind Olivia that she didn't belong. Olivia felt the sting of those words but remained composed. She stood tall, her voice steady as she insisted on her decision. Lauren, flustered by Olivia's poise, quickly sought backup. She gave a subtle signal to Victor Coleman, the store manager who had been watching from a distance. Victor approached with the easy confidence of a man used to being in control. In his tailored suit and polished shoes, he exuded authority, but his eyes held a gleam of condescension that couldn't be missed. After a short, strained exchange, Victor bluntly demanded proof of Olivia's ability to pay before they could proceed with the transaction. His words, while cloaked in formal politeness, carried a heavy weight of prejudice. Olivia had never been asked for proof when shopping before. She knew exactly why it was happening now. Her heart pounded with a mix of anger and hurt, but outwardly she remained calm. She stated firmly that she had never been required to prove her financial status in any other store and that it shouldn't be any different here. Victor's face hardened. His voice dropped to a colder, more commanding tone. If Olivia couldn't provide proof, he said, she would need to leave. The boutique was for serious customers only. Around them, other shoppers pretended not to listen, but their eyes were glued to the scene. Whispers floated through the air, some full of pity, others of smug satisfaction. Olivia glanced around and realized she was being judged not just by Victor and Lauren, but by an entire room filled with strangers who saw her as out of place, undeserving. Still, she stood firm. She refused to allow the store's prejudice to rob her of her dignity. Her hands remained steady, her voice clear, but inside, she felt the weight of the injustice pressing down on her chest. Finally, with one last cold glare, Victor moved closer, making it clear he would not back down. Without warning, he reached out, grabbed Olivia's arm roughly, and physically forced her toward the door. The boutique's luxurious facade crumbled in that moment, revealing the ugliness beneath. Victor's voice, loud and cutting, rang out across the marble floors as he told her to take her business elsewhere, suggesting she would be more comfortable in cheaper stores down the street. Olivia stumbled outside, the bright California sun hitting her face like a spotlight. Behind her, the boutique's gleaming doors closed with a cruel finality, shutting her out not just from the store, but from the world of privilege that believed it had the right to decide who was worthy. People on the sidewalk paused, some curious, some indifferent. Olivia stood there, steadying her breath, holding on to her pride even as the sting of humiliation burned deep. She knew this wasn't just about a watch. It was about something far bigger. And deep down, she knew this was not the end of the story. Not by a long shot. For a long moment, Olivia Bennet simply stood outside Elegance Boutique, feeling the weight of the humiliation she had just endured. The sun was bright against her skin, the noise of Rodeo Drive buzzing all around her, but for her, the world felt strangely muted. Her heart raced, her hands trembled slightly, but her face remained composed, her head held high. She refused to give the world the satisfaction of seeing her broken. Every part of her wanted to scream or cry or walk away as fast as she could, but Olivia knew better. In moments like this, dignity was a choice. She chose it. She chose herself. She chose not to let their ignorance define her. People glanced at her as they passed by, some offering curious stares, others pretending not to notice. Olivia stood calmly, brushing invisible dust off her white t-shirt, breathing deeply, willing herself to stay rooted in her own strength. Inside the boutique, she could see the faces of the employees through the glass. Victor Coleman stood tall and unbothered, exchanging whispers with Lauren Miller, who wore a faint, smug smile. To them, it was just another day. Another customer dismissed. Another person judged unworthy. But they had no idea who she really was or the life she had lived. Olivia wasn't angry because they didn't know. She was angry because they didn't care. For a moment, she debated whether to leave quietly or take some action. But then a soft voice behind her broke through her thoughts. A woman with kind eyes and a familiar face approached her, concern written all over her. It was Natalie Brooks, the actress known for her humanitarian work as much as her films. Natalie had witnessed the entire encounter and couldn't stand by in silence. She offered Olivia a few gentle words of solidarity, words that warmed Olivia's heart more than she could say. In a place so full of cold judgment, this simple kindness felt like a life raft. Olivia smiled faintly and thanked her, her voice soft but steady. She wasn't used to drawing attention to herself, especially not like this, but she realized that maybe being visible at this moment mattered. Maybe it wasn't just about her anymore. Maybe it was about everyone who had ever been made to feel small for being different, for not fitting into someone else's shallow expectations. Still, Olivia didn't want a scene. She didn't want pity. What she wanted was respect, the quiet, simple kind that every human being deserves without having to earn it. She stepped aside, leaning against a nearby bench, and took a few minutes to collect herself. She looked at the boutique again, not with sadness but with a renewed sense of purpose. She remembered why she had come here in the first place. It was not to impress anyone. It was to find a gift full of meaning for the man who loved her for exactly who she was. Across the street, a few more people had begun to notice her. Some whispered, some pulled out phones, a few even snapped pictures, but Olivia didn't flinch. If her presence made them uncomfortable, so be it. She wasn't going to apologize for existing in their world. She was tired of feeling like she had to. Every small humiliation she had experienced in her life, the polite dismissals, the raised eyebrows, the assumptions made before she even spoke, felt like they had been preparing her for this moment. And she realized something important as she stood there under the afternoon sun. Her dignity wasn't something anyone could take away. It didn't live in the expensive boutiques, the glances of strangers, or the approval of people who didn't matter. It lived inside her. It had been built carefully, brick, by every choice she had ever made to hold her head high when the world tried to push her down. When the sleek black Rolls-Royce finally pulled up beside the curb, heads turned again. The tinted windows gleamed under the sunlight. Olivia barely blinked. She knew who it was even before the door opened. She knew because she could feel it, the way the energy shifted, the way the sidewalk seemed to pause in anticipation. Ethan Bennett stepped out, calm and composed but with a sharpness in his eyes that promised justice. Olivia met his gaze across the crowd, and for the first time since she had been thrown out of the store, she allowed herself to breathe deeply again. She wasn't alone. She had never been alone. And together, they were about to remind everyone watching that real worth could never be judged by appearances. The moment Ethan Bennett stepped out of the Rolls-Royce, a subtle shift rippled through the crowded sidewalk. People turned their heads instinctively, sensing the arrival of someone important even before they recognized him. Ethan moved with a quiet authority, not the flashy kind that demanded attention, but the kind that simply commanded it by nature. His navy suit was perfectly tailored, his polished shoes hitting the pavement with steady, deliberate steps. His sharp eyes scanned the scene quickly, settling immediately on Olivia standing quietly by the bench. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, something strong and deeply reassuring. Without wasting a second, Ethan crossed the street and approached her, his expression growing colder and more focused the closer he got to the boutique. Olivia didn't need to say a word. The tension in her posture, the hurt hidden carefully behind her calm face, said everything. Ethan's jaw tightened as he turned toward Elegance Boutique, his gaze hardening. He understood exactly what had happened, and he had no intention of letting it slide. Inside the store, Victor Coleman and Lauren Miller watched nervously from behind the gleaming glass. At first, they didn't recognize him. To them, he was just another sharply dressed man, maybe another wealthy customer they would gladly bend over backward to serve. But as Ethan pushed open the door and stepped inside, the temperature in the room seemed to drop a few degrees. Customers paused mid-sentence. Staff straightened up instinctively. Victor's smile faltered the moment recognition flickered across his face. Ethan Bennett wasn't just another rich man.